Sí.
Sí, está prendido. Bueno, esta sesión está a cargo de los profesores Josephine Smart, que es la y el profesor Aula. Ambos vienen de muy lejos, ¿sí? Y son egresados de la Universidad de Calgary, Alberta, y la maestría y el doctorado los hicieron en la Universidad de Toronto. Ambos son profesores de tiempo completo del Departamento de Antropología de la Universidad de Calgary y trabajan temas relacionados con China, particularmente Hong Kong, ¿sí? Y en el caso de Alan, subrayando áreas ocupadas ilegalmente, vivienda, desarrollo industrial, redes transnacionales, inmigración y cambios. Entonces, la mecánica es la de siempre. We will talk for 45 minutes, more or less, and then I'll give you the mic. Okay, so come on, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Buenos dias. Good morning. Thank you for coming to the lecture today, and I would like to start by thanking UNAM and the professors here in this department for hosting us today. So this is our very first visit to your campus. It is tremendously huge. So I have to come back another time and actually visit. So today I have a PowerPoint, and I would like to go very close to what I have on the PowerPoint. If I go at the speed that I have planned, it should finish within 45 minutes or so. However, if at any one time what I am saying is not clear to you, I would like to ask you to just raise your hand and ask me to clarify or explain before I go further. Because now that I discover this is a 2-hour time slot, we have lots of time to play. Also, I realize that questions and answers often come after the talk. However, given that we have 2 hours to play with, I think we have room to entertain any questions that you might want to raise during my talk, such as what about, or what do you mean, what exactly is this, that kind of clarification purposes. I think that would enhance the comprehension by all of you in regard to what I would like to say. So without further ado, let me begin. So the topic is very anthropological. And if you're coming from economics, you might want to pay special attention because you don't talk about things in that fashion, because your approach is quite different from what we do. So it is about Chinese cultural logic, and I tied it to medicine or medical practices and food choices. So, hang on, I'm not in the right place. Right, got you. So I'm just going to show you some of my recent publications that also deal with food in various aspects. This book on posthumanism is about human and non-human entanglement that makes us what we are. And that also raises the question of, in order to study human behavior and human decisions, we actually need to look beyond the human. If you're interested, we have just given a copy of this book to Professor Yolanda, and you can ask her if you can borrow it and have a look. Earlier in 2016, we have a chapter in a handbook of food and anthropology, and that particular chapter is on food, borders, and diseases. And in 2012, there is again a joint authored piece in a handbook on border studies. And the title of that chapter is on biosecurity, quarantine, and life forms and life across the border. Then in the same year, we have another piece in the journal Identities, Global Studies in Culture and Power. And that piece is titled Immobilizing Technology, Slow Science, Food Safety, and Borders. So the question is, how did I, as an anthropologist, get into food and disease studies? Well, it turns out that among many projects I have undertaken, starting in year 2000, I got funding to look at a topic that has been dear to my heart ever since I was an undergraduate, because we end up going to Europe. And I encounter all sorts of Chinese restaurants that doesn't sound very Chinese to me. And so it has been at the back of my mind in those days, what does it mean when they say Chinese food in different places? So when food crosses geographical boundaries, political borders, and ethnic borders, changes happen. And those changes are fascinating. It tells a lot about what Chinese food is, who the Chinese are, and who the consumers are, whether they are Chinese or non-Chinese. So I wrote this proposal, titled it Chop Suey and Egg Roll, Chinese Immigrant Cuisine in Canada. And I don't even know if you know what chop suey is. Do you? Yes? Do you know what egg roll is? Yes. Good for you. Because when I first went to Canada in 1974, my friends were trying to be extra friendly to me, and they told me that they love egg rolls and they love chop suey. And I look at them, and I didn't have a clue. I'm Chinese, but I am Chinese born and raised in Hong Kong. Upon landing in Canada, I'm learning that Chinese food is very different. So that was my first exposure to a study that required me to read a lot of things on Chinese culture. And just because I was born to Chinese parents and grew up in a place like Hong Kong, which has a population that is made up of more than 95% who are Chinese, just because of that, that does not make me an expert on Chinese culture. And that is a learning experience for me, okay? So I have to do a lot of reading on the background of what Chinese food is about, but also how food changed due to migration, due to the different temporal period, due to class, tied to gender, and all sorts of things. Disease came later. When I was invited by the CDC, the Centro for Disease Control in Atlanta, they deal with all sorts of emergent diseases and crises. They invited me in 2004 to be part of a panel, to actually organize a panel of social scientists to speak at their annual meeting. And this is a milestone for them, because traditionally the CDC meetings did not include social scientists. So that was the first time they did it. So why did they call upon me? It's a good story. In anthropology, there is a very well-known economic anthropologist by the name of Sidney Mintz. He wrote a very powerful book called Sweetness and Power, and it is about the sugar, the history, the political economy of sugar in the Caribbean. He subsequently wrote many other books and many articles. I happened to be a visiting professor in Hong Kong the same year he was a visiting professor. So we were colleagues for that one term at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He was the first one to be asked by the CDC, could he speak on SARS? Because that panel was organized especially to address the social science aspect of SARS, that is severe acute respiratory syndrome. I do not know if you remember this one, but later on I might remind you of what it is. In 2003, when it broke out, it spread around the world quickly, and it is a very terrible infection because the mortality rate varies between 40% to 60%. Once you got it, you're almost dead. Okay? So Sid Sydney Mins was asked, and he basically said, I don't have anything to contribute, but I know someone who can talk and who can do it, and that was me. And so he pointed them to me. That was the first time when I looked at that invitation, accepted, and realized that yes, I have a lot of that background information that I can use, but also because I've worked in China, I've worked in Hong Kong since 1983. I have accumulated a lot of first-hand experience of what happened in that part of the world. So I did further research on the topic and I gave the presentation. Oh, I keep getting the wrong one. And the third aspect that brought me into a focus of food and disease as a research topic, it was in 2006. I was the project leader of a very large and very well-funded project in Alberta. The government wanted us to look at the bovine spongiform encephalopathy problem. That is mad cow disease. And it is important to the government because Canada exports a lot of beef and all sorts of beef products. Okay? So I was supervising a team from 3 universities involving a large number of faculty members, but also a very large number of graduate students and undergraduates. That was a very exciting piece of research, and it deals, again, like SARS, with a zoonotic disease. Zoonotic diseases are diseases that affect animal and human, and they can be transmitted between the 2 life forms. And that makes it very dangerous. Okay. Any questions so far? Am I making things clear for you? Perfect. So this is SARS, and this is how bad it is. All those numbers were the infected numbers, and I don't even have to use my laser pointer. You can see China and Hong Kong being singled out because they were the location of origin for SARS. And within a few months, it spread literally to all corners of the world. And because of the high mortality rate, every country had to deal with it up front. And that's why CDC was very interested. Were you affected, Mexico? I don't see you on the list. Lucky you. In Canada, we were affected, and we did not deal with it very well. At that time, in 2003 and 2004, SARS was identified or suspected to be carried by this particular animal called a civet cat. Now, a civet cat is right there. Okay, you see that? I don't. Okay. It's a mammal. Never mind. Yeah, it's a mammal. And it is a feature on many restaurant menus. That means the Chinese consumed it. And it is precisely through the consumption of that animal that people were suspected to contract the disease, this zoonotic disease that we call SARS. So right away, the government of China came out with a policy to kill all civet cats that were already in the market and all the animals that were raised on the farm intended for the market. So within the country of China, they killed all the available civet cats. But they could not kill all the wild members, wild species. So they live in the wild, they are in the tree canopies. The government cannot capture them all, so they were left alone as is. So when I was invited by the CDC, what did I talk about? Straightforward. Food safety, emergent infectious disease risk, and food choices. And basically, what happened was this. I told the audience that despite the policy and action by the government in China, there emerged an underground market, black market for civet cats. That is, people were told about the danger of consuming the animal. People were told about the high mortality rate associated with SARS. And lo and behold, there was a black market, an underground market for this same animal. And people were buying them. At extra money yet, they have to pay more for it because it's now illegal. It is in the black market. So, as being a non-Chinese person or as a critical thinker, you will say, what is wrong with the Chinese? Why are they doing this kind of seemingly self-destructive and suicidal food choice decisions? Why were they doing it? So when I asked around, this is what I was told. The people who bought civet cat for consumption from the black market had an understanding that this animal is good for you. Good for you in what way? It is part of a very large repertoire of animals that are usually cooked with very carefully selected herbs, medicines, and other things. And the dish itself has a special name, and that is, it is called in Chinese, pu ping in Mandarin, or bo ban in Cantonese. And it is a tonic food because it has, or it is believed to have, the property of strengthening your body, of moderating certain conditions that make you weak or that make you ill. It's a powerful idea that this tonic food is good for you. And so the tonic food is something that is consumed not only because you are sick or after you are sick, but it is consumed on a periodic, schedule as part of a protective, preventative, or generally strengthening tonic so that you are able to have greater resistance to diseases or greater resilience when things break out. Got it? Okay. So now, it's starting to be clear to you that medicine and food in the Chinese way of thinking is much more integrated than we normally would think about. Furthermore, the higher price of those civet cats has everything to do with the fact that they are sourced from the wild. And people believe that the wild species are cleaner, safer, because they have not been in contact with humans. And they are more rural, that means powerful, potent, and that they're more pure. And of course, from a purely medical and scientific perspective, this is totally wrong. Because the civet cat contract that particular virus from the bats. So that just because they have not been in contact with human species does not safeguard them from being contaminated. And it is when they are in contact with humans that the human beings become the next victim of that infection. So when it comes to zoonotic diseases, it's actually a very complicated route of cross-infection. So far, so good. And therefore, I'm going to give you the conclusion that I gave to the CDC audience. And that is, from my perspective, it is very simple. Biomedical interventions, such as vaccinations, surgery, drugs, dietary restrictions, and biosecurity protocols, such as Nobody leaves the farm once an animal got sick, or once one animal got sick, you kill all the animals on the same farm. Okay? So that happened with avian flu, that happened with Vaca Loco, that happens with foot and mouth. It also just recently happened, it's been happening now with the swine flu, the swine fever. Okay? Despite, though these are common approaches to disease management now, in both animals and humans. And I'm arguing that these biomedical interventions and biosecurity protocols cannot always solve all biomedical problems perfectly. Why? It is because when that cross-infection involves human beings, when the people who are looking after the animals and livestock are human beings, then you have human decisions in the way. And human behavior is governed by, to a large extent, by cultural logics that may be incompatible with a Western-centric approach to medicine and biosecurity. So effective biomedical interventions must include a sound knowledge of context-specific cultural foundations and practices. That is, if you want to introduce the appropriate biomedical intervention in Mexico, I hope that those medical personnel would have a very good understanding of Mexican culture, but not just Mexican culture as per se, but also all the indigenous groups and their cultural practices and beliefs, because Mexico, just like Canada, is a multicultural country. It involves people of many different cultural backgrounds, right? And people, even if you have a seemingly homogeneous population like the Chinese, they are not all the same people. They are somewhat different by class, by all sorts of other matrices. So now, in the remainder presentation, I am going to show you what I mean by context-specific cultural foundations and practices. Got it? Okay. All right. Let us start. The Chinese humoral theory of health. The human body in the Chinese traditional way of thinking, and I like to qualify here, not all Chinese think alike, and not all Chinese who think alike will explain it in the same way. And that is because a lot of our cultural ideas are socialized from early on and are so well internalized, they become tacit knowledge. Tacit simply means it is sort of built in. But of course, none of us is born with a body of cultural knowledge. We have to acquire it in our lifetime. That's what social learning is. That is what socialization is. Even when you are not told, don't eat this, don't eat that, you learn by watching other people. And so today, if you ask me, how do you drive a car? I would have trouble telling you. Even though I took a 1-week course to learn to drive, but a lot of it now becomes so natural because it's part of the tacit knowledge. In the day when I learned to drive, we still have a key that we turn in the ignition. Many of you are now driving with just a button to start your car, correct? There. So that tacit knowledge is almost like built in. It just comes naturally, right? So now, this way of Chinese thinking is widely understood, but not all Chinese can explain it the way I do. And even though I was born to Chinese parents, I have to learn all this from reading books and consulting with the experts. So there you go. So this is my way of reproducing some of this knowledge for you. So the human body in the Chinese way of thinking is made up of two opposing forces. They are opposite forces. There is the yin and there is the yang. The yin forces is associated with soft, with dark, with the earth, with female, with the moon, with water. Is soft. Yang forces is the sun, bright, the male, loud, hot. These are opposing forces. So on the surface, the Chinese way of thinking is very much like the Western thinking in binary oppositions. Good and bad, black and white, hot and cold. But in fact, the categories may be similar, but the understanding is very different. Because for the Chinese, the body must contain, every body must contain both forces at the same time. So the opposite forces exist in a complementary coexistence, and it is a necessary condition for existence. So that in me, I'm a female, I have both the yin and yang forces. It's just that my yin forces, the feminine, the female energy, is stronger, is more dominant than the male forces. Whereas for Alan, he also has the female forces in him. It is not the dominant forces, not the dominant energy. So far, so good? All right. When a person becomes ill or the person feels unwell, it is believed in the Chinese thinking that these forces is out of balance. You're too hot or you're too cold, not in the physical sense, but in the composition of the two opposing forces. In the universe, the cosmos, according to the Chinese way of thinking, is also made up of the same opposing forces. Okay? So when there is an imbalance created by whatever factor, then you see certain outcomes, such as the climate change today. I am sure the Chinese must have some sort of explanation to it based on this understanding of the coexistence of the two forces that create a balance. And somehow when the balance is upset, things happen. Now when you get sick, okay, don't worry, it can be fixed. Because all you have to do is to restore the balance. Or to put it in a more positive way, you can stay healthy at all times by maintaining the proper balance of your body. And the Chinese medical approach is highly particularistic. What I mean is that they believe, the medical doctors, the Chinese medical doctors, believe that every single one of us, each body is a unique combination of forces, of energy. One solution does not apply to all. When you are unwell in a very particular way. And you have to target that particular person by knowing the full history, by knowing what he or she has done recently, what he has or she has consumed recently, and so on and so forth, in order to create the proper package of medicine so that the balance can be restored. What is good for me is not good for you or you or you. So the optimal balance varies from person to person, and all elements, by that definition, have specific attributes, have specific characteristics that can be utilized to enhance or restore the humoral balance within one's system. And that is where the food comes in. All food items have specific attributes. They can be hot or they can be cold, as defined within this idea of yin-yang balance. And so food can be manipulated in order to enhance or disrupt a person's humoral balance. And therefore, if I don't like Alan enough, I can poison him, I can make him sick, not by giving him poison that can be tested in a lab, but by modifying his diet so that his balance is totally out of whack. There, okay. So now, to summarize one more time, okay? The Western versus the Chinese approach to food and disease. In terms of worldview, the Western worldview is in binary opposition. The Chinese worldview has to do with the complementarity between the two opposing forces. The causes of illness in the Western approach has everything to do with external pathogens, largely. Of course, there are internal problems such as cancer and all sorts of Alzheimer and so on and so forth. But by and large, we look at illness as being a form of infection. Something foreign has invaded your body. Therefore, you take antibiotic to kill those foreign bodies. In doing so, you're also killing part of your own body, the natural flora and fauna. That is why when you take antibiotics, one of the common side effects is diarrhea, because you're killing off all your life forms inside your body. Anyway, with the Chinese, you are sick because your system is out of balance. So let us see what we can do to restore that. So the treatment goes accordingly. With the Western approach, pathogen-specific intervention, drugs and surgery. Remove the growth, okay? Simple. Take the drugs, kill those pathogens. With the Chinese, you change your food and you change your lifestyle in order to restore the balance. But here I must stop and remind you about one thing. In the Western way of thinking, if something is good, it's good to have lots of it, isn't it? Money is good, just give me all your money. Champagne is good, give me a second glass, a third one. You got that? In the Chinese way of thinking, just because something is good doesn't mean that a lot of it is actually good. A lot of anything is actually very bad. Do you understand what I'm telling you now? Because it is all about balance. And in fact, the Chinese don't really think of food as being bad or good. They think of it as being, this is hot. Don't eat too much of that because that will give you too much hot. This particular fruit is hot and poisonous. This is a bad translation. In the Chinese way of saying hot and poisonous, it doesn't mean that you will die from it. It just simply means that it would really upset you very quickly. So there is a particular fruit called lychee. You know lychee, right? Be careful. One lychee, according to the Chinese, is equivalent to 3 fires. You eat 10, you are burning. Okay, you got that? So the Chinese don't think about it's good, therefore eat lots of it. Eat lots of it. No, no, no. You must eat just sufficient so that the balance is never upset. Seemingly, you could have something that is considered as hot, as disruptive. In the Chinese way of thinking, it's perfectly good to eat some of it because you need both of the two opposing forces. Nothing is ever absolutely bad and nothing is absolutely good. It is about balance. I have 5 minutes left, but let me continue. So a further example, during the month. This is specific to women for the month after giving birth. And this is my way of telling you in concrete ways how behavior and food can be changed as a way of restoring health and to maintain health. So, what happened during that month? I am drawing from a very wonderful publication in 1978 that was done by a researcher in the field of ethnomedicine, and she interviewed a number of Taiwanese women in the US hospital to ask them about what they do during that month. So during the month, or sitting the month, is a 1 month period within which there are all sorts of ritual food that you don't see any other time, except during this very specific month after giving birth. So at the end of the 1 month, traditionally, there will be a banquet to celebrate the birth of the child. Why 1 month? Well, we have to wait until the child is still alive after 1 month, I think, because child mortality rate is real. So you wait for a month, but also I think you wait for a month so that the woman, the mother, is also well enough to engage in this kind of social occasion. Gifts would be sent to your relatives and friends by the family who has the baby. And among the gifts would be hard-boiled eggs, but they must be dyed red. And red is a good color in Chinese thinking. There is a special concoction that requires rice vinegar, and it has to be the dark kind, not the white kind. And it has to be cooked with ginger and pork and hard-boiled eggs. And that is specifically for the mother, the young mother. But other people can also receive it as a gift, and we love it. But other people, like Alan, who did not grow up in a Chinese family, he ends up liking it too. But it can take some using to. You're drinking vinegar, but it's very tasty. During that month, the young mother is under very strict rules. And these rules has everything to do with the understanding that the birthing process is both depleting and polluting. It is polluting because the blood that was shed during that birthing process is considered highly polluting. Menstrual blood is very polluting, and therefore in Chinese traditional way of thinking, a man must not have intercourse with a woman during her menstrual cycle. And then I discovered subsequently that in Western thinking, it is also understood that you don't have sex with a woman during her menstrual cycle, because again, there is a general understanding that that blood is polluted. Okay? Depleting is simple. The woman had carried this child for 9 months. Her energy had gone into the making of this fetus. It depletes her because that energy is gone. And during the birthing process, there is water, there is blood. That woman is drained. Therefore, at the end of that birth, she is very, very low on the hot energy. She is very high on the cold energy. And the key is to bring the hot up to balance the cold. These are the 12 rules. And I can tell you, I didn't do them after I gave birth to our daughter. In fact, I broke some rules because in the hospital, on my menu that I can choose my food from, beer was one of those items. And my in-laws, who are good immigrants from Glasgow, Scotland, told me that beer is very good because it makes the milk come easily. So I had beer with my meal when I was in the hospital. And when my mother learned about it, she was appalled. She was convinced I have damaged my system irreparably and I will pay eventually, because it broke all those rules. I walked to the hospital to give birth. I walked home from the hospital with the baby. Of course, Alan was accompanying us. And I was definitely blown on by the wind and by whatever it is. And I walk around and I do see friends. And I definitely bathe. There is no way I don't bathe or shampoo for a whole month. And I didn't eat chicken every single day. But these are the rules. What do you think of these rules? Would you do it? Would you let your wife do it? You see, but if you look beneath, how could you do it? What do you mean by do not read or cry? Of course I will read. How am I going to spend my time if I can't visit with my friends after giving birth, But if you look at it from a purely anthropological perspective, then you understand that these rules are supposed to achieve three things. Number one, to protect the woman and the child from cross-infection. Number two, to introduce a very high protein diet so that the woman's body could be restored. It's high protein. Eat the chicken every day if you could afford it. And the chicken has to be cooked with other hot items, sesame oil, ginger, other things. So it restores that balance, it restores her health. And then the third one is that you don't visit temples. The woman, remember, she is a source of pollution after giving birth. If you go to the temple, you're polluting the gods. You're polluting the other people who are there to pay respect to the gods. So you are not disrupting the society by not going to those public places and religious places. So that is the anthropologist talking, okay? Let us keep going. So there, I explained all this, and my time is up at this slide, but I'm going to keep going for another 10 minutes until you stop me, okay? So this is the chicken. All right? So, do all Chinese know what each food item is, whether it is hot or cold, whether it's neutral, whether it is poisonous, whether it is what? No. Most of us don't know, because even our mothers and grandmothers, who are the manager in the house, who manage the food, and they are the one who will tell us, yes, winter melon soup is good for the summertime, drink this. Or in winter, you eat this. Or no, you should never eat dog in the summertime because it's the wrong time to do so. They are the knowledge holders. But do they explain to us that this is hot and cold? They don't. They just know. It's part of that tacit knowledge that they have learned from their older generations and so on and so forth. And now there are lots of cookbooks who are also telling you about all sorts of things. But let me just give you a caution right now. Just because you find this fascinating, please don't go home and experiment with all your food, okay? Just eat what you are comfortable with, okay? And when in doubt, ask. When you're in China and people offer you certain things and you can ask, what is this, If I have a sore throat, should I eat this? And they can tell you, no. If you have a sore throat, don't eat this one because this is a very hot item. And a sore throat is associated with having too much hotness. So, what is hot and cold? Some examples. Banana. It has cold attributes. It's good for people suffering from high blood pressure and chronic constipation. But just wait. Remember, food attributes can be mixed up, can be manipulated. So here you go. But banana cooked with alcohol neutralizes its cold attribute because alcohol is hot. So those of you who are drinking regularly, pay attention. So banana cooked in alcohol is good for something. Okay, it's actually good for head cold. So if you're a headache, you're feeling all tight. That's it. Get some banana, cook it in alcohol. Or I wonder, if you don't cook it, if you just eat banana and drink alcohol, I wonder if it has the same impact. I don't know. Never try it. Food as medicine and medicine as food in food. That integration is perfect. There is no contradiction in the Chinese mind. Those two go hand in hand. So, I have more slides. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, good. Now, just remember, don't try this at home, okay? Or try it with caution, okay? All right. The tacit knowledge that I talk about. So, I don't know if you have heard this comment, but there is a general understanding that the Chinese eat everything and anything. Anything with 4 legs is edible except a table. Have you heard that before about the Chinese?
Yes.
Yes. So indeed, as a Chinese, until I did all this research, I have no way of explaining why the Chinese eat everything. I just thought that the Chinese are very resourceful and they are not wasteful. Why waste food that can be eaten? Just because it's the feet of a chicken or the tail of a pig. Okay? But in fact, there is a lot to do with this notion of the tight integration of food and disease. There are 2 main streams of explanation about the highly open and inclusive food choices in Chinese cuisine. The first explanation has to do with poverty and necessity are the root causes that gave rise to culinary inventiveness and inclusiveness. If you're poor enough, you will eat anything and everything. And for the Chinese, like the Egyptians, they have existed for so long with written, documents and so on and so forth. It is well known from early on that they did eat everything and anything. And yes, they have gone through many cycles of war, famine, natural disasters, man-made disasters. This explanation sounds very plausible until you sit back and say, wait a minute, the Guatemalans are poor and they have a necessity to sustain themselves. Do they eat everything and anything? Maybe. But there are other poor cultures, such as in Europe, for instance, they were not always wealthy. In the United States, they are now very wealthy, but within the United States, you have pockets of population that are below the poverty line. So be it in the past or be it now, there are always poor people. And did they eat everything and everything, anything, like the Chinese? No. And therefore, this kind of necessity and poverty-focused explanation, I think might explain something. And I'll tell you why I think like that. It is because my father was telling us that during the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong, his family left Hong Kong like many people, and they went to China because China was a much bigger place and there could be more resources available. Hong Kong was a tiny place, and once the import of food stopped, you don't have food. But because so many people were displaced from their home, there were lots of refugees around, and my father told us that he remembered having to find trees and eat the tree bark as a way of passing, getting some sustenance. And my mother was not displaced from her home, and she came from a definitely middle-class background because her father, my grandfather, was a merchant. But during the Japanese occupation, they had to enhance their rice, because they eat rice, right? And there was a shortage of rice, or you want to save as much of it as possible because you never know if you would get more. So they add yams to the rice to create the bulk, so that you consume less rice, but you have enough bulk to fill your stomach. And my mother never ate yam in her entire adult life. We love yams as children. She would not eat it. She does not eat it because she said they had to supplement their rice with yam. That was a hardship food for her. She doesn't do it. So yes, I do believe that poverty and necessity could be a reason. But I think there is a second explanation. And this is what I think, based on my research, could explain his inclusiveness in Chinese food. And I subsequently consult other experts, and they agree with me that this is a very likely reason. Then the Chinese worldview, based on yin-yang complementarity regarding health, means that everything has attributes that can be utilized to restore health. Therefore, as long as you know what to do with your food, everything can produce optimal effects for your body and for your health. If you believe in that, why would you exclude the cat? Why would you exclude snakes? Why would you exclude few rodents like this one? It's cured like bacon, and this animal, after it's dried, because I took the picture so I was in the market for it, would be this long. So when it is a fresh, live animal, it has to be a lot bigger than that. It's a big thing, okay? Not cheap either, 38 yuan in 2009. In restaurants in China, next time you go, and in Hong Kong as well, but this picture was taken in Guangzhou, they have menu, soup menu like this, okay? And I assume that you don't read Chinese, so do you read Chinese? Okay, so you have to take my word for it, okay? It costs 3 yuan, which is equivalent to 50 Canadian cents. So it is about 7 pesos for the soup. Very cheap, okay? The first soup is made of a particular root herb with sugar cane and with pork bones and pork meat. And this soup is good to cool your system, to cool down in summertime, to cool you down, to detoxify you, and to facilitate the passing of your urine. Sounds great for 7 pesos. Second soup. It comes with the dried fruit called dragon's eye, longyan. Okay, it's a neutral fruit. It is widely respected. It's got walnuts. Thank you. I couldn't get it. Got walnuts, longyan, pork bone, and pork meat. And it is good to strengthen your spleen and your stomach. Your spleen and your stomach, and it will calm. It has a calming effect. This is sugar, I think. The longyan, and this is sweet. Got lots of fructose in it. Okay. So this kind of cultural knowledge, as you can see, is explicitly expressed as the outcome of consuming this particular soup. And you can tell that it carries full medicinal, health-related outcomes. And this is a food item offered by a restaurant. And this kind of thing is commonly seen in China. All right. Are you good? Chameleon? No, you don't dismiss them. It has attributes. And in fact, the snakes, despite the fact that most of us might be afraid of snakes, they're pretty tasty, especially if you cook it with salt and pepper, and you deep fry it. It's crunchy, it's delicious. Fat, oil, and salt, all good. In conclusion, I'd like to warn you against exoticizing Chinese cultural logic. The Chinese think like that, but they're not the only people who think like that. When I survey a lot of indigenous cultures and their knowledge about health and their thinking, understanding of the cosmos, I discover a tremendous overlap between those indigenous thinking and the Chinese way of thinking. So this book was written by Eduardo Marquette, and it was published in 1997, and it is about guinea pigs in Ecuador. And if you look at the chapter heading, and I actually assigned this book in my course on anthropology of food, and the students love it. Look at the heading, the healing meat. You see this? The social and cultural logics. It turns out in Ecuador, among the indigenous people, they think very much like the Chinese. So the guinea pig can be consumed at certain times of the year under specific conditions. So it is it is also understood as a hot meat, okay? And interestingly, during the menstrual cycle, among the Ecuadorians, it is understood that women must not consume guinea pig. But in the Chinese way of thinking, during menstruation, the woman is becoming depleted because she's bleeding. Therefore, she should consume hot. So if it is a Chinese in Ecuador, I wonder if she would be, having guinea pig soup, during that period. And if it is, that is totally contrary to what the Ecuadorians would think about. So what I'm trying to say is, if you look around, there are actually a lot of cultures whose thinking and practice actually are very close to what the Chinese do in terms of the very good, strong integration between food and medicine. And in fact, I think in Western culture, we are already going a long way towards practicing that, even though we don't call it that. Think of all the yogurt they're trying to sell you that contains probiotics that is supposed to be good for your body. And they charge you more for those things too. Think of all the meditation and yoga now that they're saying you should do because it is good for your body, it makes you healthy, and so on and so forth. So I think in one way or another, this understanding of the close integration between food and health, definitely, but food as medicine, as the way the Chinese are thinking and doing, I think that it's more common than you think. So thank you.
That's very interesting, and nothing to do with the kind of analysis that we
No.
That's very interesting. And now I'm giving you the mic. Who wants to answer, say anything?
You're welcome to share your wisdom and knowledge too, and your encounter with Chinese food or whatever it is.
We are on their show.
Huh? We're on their show.
And you can say, okay.
Hello?
I'm not. Yeah. Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you for your presentation. I found it really interesting. And my question is,
Es que no se oye, le voy a sacar el micrófono o está
So, my question is, how is this traditional Chinese medicine in China? I mean, in hospitals, all the hospitals and all doctors in China have this kind of way of thinking about the yin and yang, or this is more like a specific sector in Chinese medicine? I'm just wondering that. Thank you.
Medicine in China today comes in two forms. There is the traditional Chinese medicine, and that is the form that was practiced for the longest time. So there is a great continuation in the last several thousand years in Chinese medicine. And those are very well written down, so there are volumes of medical texts that specifically spell out all this yin yang and all the food that are specified for their attributes and their use and so on and so forth. That body is well established in China. And they have many universities and medical schools that train doctors in Chinese medicine. But since 1949, with the founding of the People's Republic of China, eventually they established new medical schools that also train their doctor in Western medicine. And many doctors take both degrees in Western medicine and Chinese medicine in China. So when you as a patient go into a clinic today in China, you will be asked whether you want your prescription in Western medicine or in Chinese medicine. You have a choice, okay? So did I answer your question? Perfect.
I might add to that too, that traditional Chinese medicine is becoming, although it's always been there, it's actually being pushed more heavily under the current president, Xi Jinping. He's really kind of putting a lot of more resources into doing the research and demonstrating kind of in using Western scientific clinical trials, the efficacy of traditional Chinese medicine. So it's kind of part of the whole kind of Chinese civilizational push.
Thank you. It was a pretty interesting presentation. I have a question about how do you transmit and how do you share this tacit knowledge regarding to diseases? You know, if they think that some food is always good in certain time and certain amount, how do you go to them, you know, make the contact and transmit this information about that it cannot be healthy for them to eat it?
So you're asking me, in my research, how did I find information about all this food?
How do you communicate with people, with Chinese people, that certain diseases can be transmitted from certain animals and that kind of stuff?
Oh, you're talking about specifically about zoonotic diseases?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. I did not try to do research on all zoonotic diseases. Right now, it's the total number that exists that we know of, not only in China but around the world, there are over 100 zoonotic diseases. Okay, so I did not ask about all of them. For instance, one of the oldest ones that people know about would be rabies. And it would be they would be most concerned about the transmission from dog to human, because the dogs are more common animals. No, I did not. But with SARS, it is, at the time when I was doing my research, I was in Hong Kong and Guangzhou. It was easy because everybody knows it, because it was killing people left and right. So it was a people, first of all, understood, and at that time they understood that particular disease. Secondly, the information about the black market and whatnot, that is much more difficult to get. And in fact, people would normally be very reluctant to talk about it, because in China, if the government has a policy, and this is from the central government, from Beijing, not from the local government, that's even more powerful. If the government has a policy saying no certificate should be bought and sold, and if you talk about it, even talk about it, it could be dangerous, right? Because you could be called upon by the police and asked, what are you doing? What do you know? Who is supplying you? And so on. So I got this from people that I already know, that I already knew before. And this happened to be people in the business circle and in government circles, so that they interact with other government officials and business people. And those were the people who actually talked about the black market and the extra cost and also that stuff. I did not ask people I did not know, because I don't want to endanger them. Doing research in China, you have to be very careful, and we have an ethical code that we must never harm the people will help us in our research. Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. You must be a researcher yourself, otherwise you will not be asking this question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. Your presentation has been very interesting for me because I am an anthropologist. And I have two questions. The first one is, in the first part of your presentation about this animal, this roedor that has been killed because of the transmission of disease, was not consideration of the public policy that the depletion of this animal, the killing of this animal was provoking as well to the earth system, to the environment, a balance, because they were killing a lot of animals and that maybe provoke an imbalance in the equilibrium, in the balance of the earth animals. But this is the first, it was not any consideration of this issue. And the other one is, if you tell us a little bit about your methodology of this research. You made interviews, or which technique or methodology do you apply to this?
The first question. With the culling, in English we call it a cull, C-U-L-L. That simply means a massive killing of a total population. If all the civet cats that killed were wild, living civet cats, then yes, the damage to the breeding population in China would be horrendous. But in China, the market demand for civet cats already supported farming of civet cats. That means they are kept on a farm. They are reproduced like farm animals to supply the market. Remember, China has 1.3 billion people. That demand is very high. Okay? So when they cull civet cats, they were culling only the farm civet cats. That did not affect the naturally occurring breeding populations in the country. So that is the first answer. The second one, my methodology. I talk to people, but obviously, like I already said, I don't talk to people I do not already know because of the sensitive nature of the questions. Number two, I do a lot of reading, not just in newspapers, but magazines, textbooks, and I read things before, because when I try to understand the integration between food, health, and medicine, that is well written in the Chinese language. And thanks to the Chinese written language, there's so much volume, and they are all in Chinese. So if I had not had the fluency in reading Chinese, this won't go very far, because the documentations are in Chinese. There are cookbooks, there are magazines in English, but they would never go as far as what I could do in the Chinese language. And if I didn't have Chinese language, I could not use my previous, knowledge, such as the 2009 pictures I took in Guangzhou of the restaurant menu with the soup. That was taken in 2009, right? But I actually have pictures that even went further back before 2003 when SARS came on. So all those menus are long-standing, and the understanding of their health benefits are well established, all written down. So those were my two methodologies. And therefore, we are lucky in anthropology. For those of you who are not in anthropology, there is a rule in anthropology, in social anthropology, that if you want to study, for example, I'm interested in doing work in Mexico, then the number one thing required, among many other things, is that I must know some Spanish. And I must eventually acquire sufficient proficiency to read and write in your language. So that is a very good rule. Because without that, I don't think I could have gone this far. Don't forget, I forgot there's a third methodology. So I draw on some of my own information growing up in Hong Kong. And now I ask my mother about it the way I would ask my informant. Mom, what do you mean by winter melon is good for summer, as a summer dish? Or I would ask my friends, what do you do if you have a cold sore? What do you do if you have a sore throat? What do you do when you break out in acne, you know? So they can tell me, and many of them can indeed explain, oh, you break out because you are too hot. You need to cool down. So now eat some grass jello. You eat French fries, pair it with a beer, because beer is cold, except not everything cold is cold. Beer has alcohol, so the alcohol is actually a hot element, but it's well chilled, so I don't know where the balance is. But yeah, the general thinking of, you eat French fries, have a beer, it balances out. I don't know if it works. But those, yeah, thank you for asking. Good.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.